Get my chair. Oh, we're live. This is me getting the chair. There's 2 pages. There we go. Testing. You might have to unmute the blue mic. Because the speaker probably isn't on. Just turn one on, yeah. Hello, 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 hello. Hello. How are you? How are you? How are you? Okay, now we're on. We're on. We're live. Welcome to YouTube, Facebook, world of the digital lifespan. Huh? I'm very loud. You can turn me down. Sia said she can't stand my voice. Anyway, we've been working our way through Isaiah. We're at chapter 41, and there's so much good stuff here. I mean, just like, wow. I have to work to keep moving, right? Because I just want to dig in so much on some of this stuff. One thing you'll notice that in all your support scriptures, they're all from the same translation, and that translation is the International Children's Bible. Why is it from there? I don't know, but I've just been gravitating to the International Children's Bible lately as one of my go-to studies. It's not a perfect translation by any stretch, but it has a very simplistic way of bringing stuff out that I've kind of been enjoying. So if that bothers you, you can always look those verses up in whatever religious Bible you want to look up. So, huh? Sounds like your children's pastoral calling is coming out. Yes, that may be true. So, how many of you can remember the years ago that we studied Isaiah 40, which was only 2 weeks, but it seems like years, right? Remember, it was all about Isaiah was prophesying that they were going to go where? Into exile. To where? Babylon, right? So, in the same understanding of if you don't tie one scripture to the next, you get lost in what's going on. So we got to remember, he just prophesied that they were going to be hauled off, and he said by a country that they really don't even know yet. And you're going to hear about a guy a little bit later in this chapter that's still 120 years away from being born and 500 miles away from Israel. So let's take a look at it. We're going to jump right in. And it says, "You lands of the sea, stand silent before me." Now, understanding that as a prophet, he's also a poet, and he just didn't know it. No, I'm joking, right? So sometimes when we read stuff, we don't necessarily understand because we don't get their illustrations or their metaphors or all that fun stuff. So when he says, "You lands of the sea," does anybody have an idea what he's talking about? Good, so I can tell you anything, it won't be no problem, right? Okay, some of your translations may actually say islands. Remember the people of the day, there was a major sea next to Israel. What was it? Mediterranean. Very good. All right. The Mediterranean Sea. And the nations that surrounded the sea was basically the known world, right? So when he says the lands of the sea, the islands of the sea, the nations of the sea, that he's basically saying every nation that borders that Mediterranean Sea. So he's using a poetic language that says, and all of the known world. All yous, right? That's what he's saying. So he says, I want all of you, everybody out there, everybody that is in the world, every nation, every tribe, every tongue, I want you to stand quietly and listen. Because when it says stand silent before me, that actually is a term that means to stand and attentively listen to me. Pay attention. So what God is basically commanding here is that all the nations are to hear what he's about to say. Now, I've given a few prophetic words in my life. I'm sure most people in here have given a few prophetic words in your life. I will tell you, I honestly had never given a prophetic word for the entire world. Right? And I really doubt that anybody in here has given a prophetic word for the entire world. So much so that you would stand up and say, I want every nation on the planet to shut up and pay attention. Because that's basically what he's saying. All right? So this is not just a localized word. It's not a city word. It's not an individual word. It's not a church word. This is a global word. And if you got a global word, you better be sure you got a global word, right? So, here is the global word. Let the people renew their strength. Let them approach me and state their case. Let's come together to decide who is right. Now I'm thinking, well, that doesn't even sound like a real cool word, right? Basically what he is saying is, hear what I'm about to tell you. I'm going to give you an opportunity to get your, see, Linda's not here, get your crap together, and we're going to have a discussion. That's what he's saying. In our language today, he's saying, I want you to be quiet for a minute, get yourself together, bring your little argument to me, and we're going to have a talk. Now, that doesn't happen very often in church, does it? Maybe it should a little bit more, but it doesn't. And he says, we're going to decide together who's right. Now, if God ever invites you into that kind of council room, man, you better have some ironclad britches because you're about to get a butt kicking, right? And this is what we need to understand. So verse 2 goes, who raised up the conqueror from the east? Who commissioned him for his righteous purpose? Now, wait a minute, I thought we was having a discussion, right? So what is the discussion God is trying to have with all these nations? Remember, what's the nation's problem? What is the problem that they're dealing with? Huh? Well, Babylon's an issue, but what's the problem? Babylon's a symptom. The issue is rebellion, right? Rebellion, sin. They don't believe the word of the Lord. So right here he says, okay, let's have this conversation. Let's talk about this a minute. And by the way, who rose up this great conqueror that's coming out of the east? So everybody there is going like, yeah, dude, I don't know what you're talking about, right? Because the guy he's talking about hasn't been born yet. The guy he's talking about won't be born for another 100, 120 years. The guy he's talking about comes from a nation that's literally 500 miles away from where he's at. They have absolutely no idea that he's talking about Cyrus the Great. About some guy who's going to come into such an amazing power, he's going to overflow onto all the nations and basically just suck them in. And they have absolutely no idea. They can't see 5 minutes ahead, let alone 120 years ahead. They can't see a mile down the road, let alone 400 or 500 miles from where Cyrus is going to be born. So he starts his conversation, he starts his dialogue with, hey, which one of you can see the future? Which one of you can predict that there'll be a man that'll be raised up in the east and he'll come and conquer every one of you? He will be a ruler of the world and he'll do it because I gave him the power. Which one of you can do that? Can you raise your hand, please? Anybody here? Anybody? Anybody? Right? That's what God's asking them. Yeah, let's start this. This is how we're going to start because, that's just a little stuff for me, right? And for God, that's little stuff. But for everybody listening, like they have no idea what he's talking about. I mean, it's not even complicated. There'll be a guy coming from the east. Well, how do you know that? Because he's God. Hello, right? So let's take a look at it. It says, the Lord hands nations over to him to trample under his feet. Huh? Hands nations to trample the kings under his feet. That makes it pretty relevant to those leaders, doesn't it? Especially when it says, to make them like dust with his sword and like wind-blown chaff with his bow. Now, we really don't always understand these illustrations. You know, if you don't know what it is to winnow wheat, which means when they harvest the wheat, they take the top portion off and they throw it on the floor and they run a bunch of oxen or donkeys or whatever over top of it to break it all up, and they throw it up in the air a couple of times, and basically all the stuff you can eat blows away and all the stuff you do eat piles up in the ground. But they do that 3 or 4 times until literally all that's left of the wheat straw is dust. It's pulverized. Now, I know it would have been easy to say, I'm going to pulverize you, right? But he's using an illustration that they all know because that's part of their culture, is harvest and winnowing of wheat. So when he's using this as an illustration, he's telling them that they're not just going to be like kind of defeated or a little overtaken, but that when this guy comes, there'll be basically nothing left of them. There'll be just dust in the wind, right? Could be a song. Am I the only one that got that? Anyway, so good old Kansas, that's right. Now, here's something I need us to understand. Is Cyrus the first person that God has raised up for his purpose? Is he the first person that God has raised up for some great purpose? Is he the first pagan that God has called and raised up for his purpose? Who was the first pagan that God called and raised up for his purpose? Abram, right? Abram came from a pagan nation, and his daddy was a pagan, and his mama was a pagan, and all his brothers and uncles and nephews and nieces were all pagans. Not the motorcycle club pagans, but they worshiped many gods. Now, do you realize that one of the many gods that Abram actually worshiped was Yahweh? And eventually down the road, when God calls him out of his father's house, out of his nation of birth, to wander the earth, there's a point in his wandering, God says, look, if you're going to listen to me, you got to put the rest of that trash away. You got to listen only to me. You got to stop playing with the toys, right? These are little house idols that they would carry with them. You got to put those away. Those are worthless. They're no more good. So you see, God called Abram out of a pagan family, out of a pagan city, out of a pagan nation, and he was still pagan, and God brought him and promised him, basically everywhere your feet touch, I'm going to give you. I mean, he was a pagan. How can that be? God surely didn't love him or like him, because he worshiped little idols made of stone and wood and metal. Man, that just wrecks a whole religious person's theology, doesn't it? But God called him out, gave him an opportunity to serve him, just like he called each and every one of us out and gave us an opportunity to serve him. So you see, he's going to call Cyrus out the same way he called Abram out. So God's not doing something he hasn't never done before. And God is also going to prophesy here in a few more minutes, not just Cyrus, but he's going to prophesy some other people. Because remember the last chapter, what were the 2 people that Isaiah prophesied about? Remember the guy that gets everybody wet? What was his name? John. See, it's been like 2 years since we studied the Bible, isn't it? All right. So he said that someone's going to come prepare a way, right? So he prophesied John the Baptist. You realize that when Isaiah prophesied John the Baptist coming, 500 years, maybe more. Probably closer to 7. I mean, he's not even challenging them with the 700-year thing. He's only challenged them with a 120-year prophecy. And he not only challenged them with that, but, I mean, he could have done the even Jesus prophecy, right? Because he prophesied John the Baptist and he prophesied Jesus in the previous chapter. How quickly we forget. Swiftly he pursues them and advances unscathed as he passes over unfamiliar land. You know, this is an interesting thing because one of the things that we have to understand, because we're not really conquering type people anymore. Most of us can't explore much further than down the street. You know, I think I've told you all the story. When I was working for Bob Evans, I had employees that worked for me, very good employees. But if bus number 7 didn't go there, they ain't never been. So on a 2-mile round-trip bus route, their entire world consisted of wherever bus number 7 went. They'd never seen the Baltimore Harbor. They'd never seen the ocean, which was only a couple hours away. They'd never seen a mountain. Matter of fact, I had several men that were 50-plus years old that had never seen a live cow or chicken. I know for some of us that's kind of hard to believe. But it's out there. People just don't know, right? So when you're traveling over unfamiliar land, who has the upper hand? The local person who lives there, right? So you've heard it said all men aren't created equal, or God didn't create all men equal. Who did? Come on, you guys. I know half of you own guns. Smith & Wesson created all men equal, right? Yeah. It's on a T-shirt. I used to have one. Anyway, so, you know, it used to be when 95 got backed up, all the tourists got stuck, right? And you know what happened? Google made all people intelligent, right? Because now everybody knows the back roads, right? So all they got to do is push the little rerouting on their little phone, and it shows them all the back roads that only the locals used to know. Now there's nothing sacred in America. And they jam up the back roads too because they really don't know where they're going. And since they have a hard time listening to the Google thing, they're always going the wrong way. So, and it's really bad, like at my house, because we have a main thoroughfare at the end of our road, and our road's a horseshoe. So if anything happens between the one side of the horseshoe and the other side of the horseshoe, and it's about 1.5 miles, which happens a lot, and Raul and Denise will attest to it, then everybody gets redirected through my neighborhood. All right? So normally here you got this quiet little neighborhood. Now I've got tractor trailers and everything else coming through my neighborhood because somebody decided not to stay on the road and run into the ditch. But it is a good time to sell something, right? But we have to understand that when you're traveling over unfamiliar territory, it's much harder to wage war where you don't know, right? And listen to this. He says he's going to make it swift, and he's going to advance unscathed, even over territory he has no idea where he's going. He's just going to bowl it all over. Ain't nothing going to slow him down. Who achieved all this, and who made it happen? Who guides the destiny of each generation from the first until now? I am the one. I am Yahweh, the first, the unchanging, the one who will be there in the end. Now, we all know this statement as, in the book of Revelation, as I am the Alpha and Omega, the first and the last, the beginning and the end. Right? So, when you put the word the in front of anything, what does it do? Not just adds emphasis, but singles it out, right? Like, I am the Batman, right? There is no other Batman, right? I am the boss, right? I'm sure some of you heard that before, right? And you've probably also heard the child respond, "You're not the boss of me." My hand would say different. No, I'm just joking. No, I'm not. But anyway, so God himself is stating, "I am." Now, we all know, where did "I am" come from? Okay? That's his name. I am. Yahweh is I am. I am Yahweh. I am that I am. All right? Moses established that when they basically blew Egypt apart. Right? So when he uses words like this, what do you think the people are remembering? What happened in Egypt? Right? They haven't forgotten. It's not important to them until all of a sudden now it is. You say, wait a minute. It's the guy who just tore up the world's greatest army, the world's greatest leader, the world's greatest nation, because that's what Egypt was in the day. And this is the God that did all that. I am the first. What does he mean by the first? He was before everything else, right? Everlasting to everlasting, the unchanging one. I have not diminished or faded out. I am the last. I will be here when nothing else is. So who are you again? Because see, that's the conversation he's having with these people. So then, here's how the nations will respond. The islands, or the nations, see it and panic. What are they seeing? They're seeing a remembrance of all the thing that God has done in relationship to his name. You see, they remember the stories. And you think people don't remember the stories? You're very, very wrong. You know, one of my favorite stories in the Bible is a woman who remembers something that happened 40 years earlier. Her name was Rahab. And something that happened probably before she was even born, she heard a story about a group of people that busted out of Egypt, and a giant cloud and a giant column of fire led them through the desert and fed them. And that they came to her city and looked it over and kept going around a mountain. And when they came back to her city, she remembered all the things that God had done. And she risked the life of herself and her family to hide a couple spies. Why? Because she heard a testimony of something that probably happened before she was even born. So these people are remembering now that these things have been stated. They're beginning to recollect. They're beginning to assemble in their mind the images of what God has done. The images of the plagues of Egypt. The images of the destruction of Pharaoh's army at the Red Sea. The image of the ground opening up and swallowing 3,500 for worshiping a fake cow. Right? The image of a snake coming out and killing thousands and then having to turn and look. They've all heard these stories. They remember the story of the Jordan River opening up and 1 million people crossing it. They remember the story of Jericho, the greatest city of the area, with walls that were so high and so wide you could race chariots around the top of the city wall, crumbling into dust. How they went and conquered nation after nation after nation, obliterating all those who came against them. They're remembering all this stuff, and they have forgotten that the Lord God is still God, because who really forgot that the Lord was their God? The people of Israel. And God's reminding them that, hey, they didn't make me God. I made them Israel. You can't unmake me as God. You may not worship me, but you're not going to unmake me as God. You weren't there from the beginning. You read the whole book of Job, it tells you all about who God is. God's saying, look, hey, who put the sun and moon up there? Who put the stars up there? Who told the water where to go? Who counts the sand on the seashore as if it was one? Holds the water of all the world in the palm of his hand and jiggles it the way he wants. So they begin to remember, and they begin to panic. The ends of the earth tremble, they approach and draw near. Why are they drawing near? Because there's a place and a time when God commands that all knees will what? All tongues will what? Confess. You think that only happens in the end? Mm-mm. Anytime God shows up in glory, that's pretty much the response you get, right? Because there is no other response. Because there is nothing else that we can say or do that would diminish who he is in our presence, right? So they all come near and they begin to listen. And this is what he says. The idol makers will bolster one another up, saying, take courage. The woodworker encourages the metalsmith. The one who flattens with a hammer spurs on the one who strikes the anvil, saying of the welding, looks good. They nail it down so the idol won't topple. Now, if this isn't the most moronic thing you've ever heard. We're going to carve out a god from this piece of wood. We're going to cover it in metal. We're going to use hammers to make it all smooth and pretty, overlay it with gold, and when it's all beautiful looking, then we have to nail it down to keep it from falling over because it's a god. I mean, doesn't that even thought process sound so retarded?
There's a word for that, oxymoron.
Yeah, I think it's just moron. Yes, sir.
Can I make a comment?
Got to make it loud.
Okay. It was like a couple of weeks ago. I was scrolling through my Facebook thing, and then there's a preacher that was talking about something that like maybe really changed the way I think about something. And changing the way you think is repentance, as you've taught us.
Yes.
But he was saying, how many of you have heard the phrase, repent and make God the Lord over your life, make God, Lord over you? And he's like, a bunch of people raise their hand, and he's like, well, all of you need to go repent. It's like, why? Because you can't make the Lord Lord, because that would imply that you were Lord over him. To make him Lord. He's been Lord from the get-go. It's like you going to the king and saying, King, I make you king. And the king's like, shut up. I'm already the king.
That's right.
And so, reading this passage, when you were talking about the nations see it and panic, and talking about, they remember all that. It's like, they didn't make me God, I made them Israel.
Mm-hmm.
So that goes to that. But then, on verse 7, it says the woodworker encourages the metalsmith. It's basically going back to that old mentality of like, let's make God for us, because we can make him Lord over us, and basically recycling that old garbage
Mm-hmm.
to try to get fed from it.
It's them trying to compete with God at their level. Now, the funny thing is there's two thought processes. I want to stop here for a second. I got some notes I want to talk about. Nail it down. We all know that expression, right? I want to nail it down. Fix it into place. That's what that means, to fix it into place. That means to put it in its proper place so that it stays there. Now, one of the things that we have to look at is anytime God showed up next to one of their idols, what happened? It fell over. Remember Dagon? Right? So what he's referring to, again, he's going back to a historical fact that when the Philistines tried to put God under their God kept falling over. No matter how many times they would nail him down, he would fall over, and eventually one time he fell over, and what happened? His head popped off, right? Which is a symbol of authority. So when he fell over and his head fell off, they had to super glue it back on, right? But he's saying that God's power is greater than anything man can create, anything that man partners with. And we know that the wood, the metal, the gold, the silver, whatever they're making out of, we know that that's nothing, right? Paul even says in the New Testament, the idols are actually nothing. But it's what we partner with in the making. And it's a demonic spirit, right? So when we make these idols, it's not the idol itself, that piece of wood, that piece of metal, it's really nothing. It's the spirit that you partner with in it that causes the problem. So I'm going to reword this in something that we might understand more today. So it's saying the idol makers will bolster, will encourage one another, saying, songwriter, take courage. Movie producer, work it out. Politician, put it all together. Educator, nail it down. See, that's terms that we can understand today because that's how we build idols in our lifetime. We don't necessarily carve them out of wood, even though somebody still does. We don't necessarily put little statues in our homes. But we do hang up things that are part of our idols, right? Like there's people right now on the mirror in their bedroom, they have 2 tickets because they went to go see their idol perform. Right? America has lots of idols. We got all kind of names for them. Musicians, movie stars, right? All these famous people. They become our idols. So when we look at what do, we don't want to go God. We don't want to embrace God. We don't want to listen to God's word. We want to do it ourselves. We want to make our own idol. We want to make something that makes us feel better, feel happy, instead of listening to the word of the Lord. Yep. But so then verse number 8 says, but you, my servant Israel, Jacob, whom I've chosen, seed of my beloved friend Abraham. And that is a mouthful, right? You, my servant, Israel, Jacob, chosen seed, friend of Abraham. That's a mouthful. But who chose who here is the question. You see, we often think that we find God. We don't ever find God. God finds us. Right? So we get the impression, just like Gabe said earlier, that we make him Lord over our life. He's actually Lord already. All we're doing is submitting to his lordship. Right? So he is Lord. Every knee will bow. Every tongue will confess. You will not have a choice. Then you do have a choice now. And see, that's the thing that we often forget, is that we do have a choice now.
But you know, every time we have a crisis, I think we'll be surprised how many people go down to their knees if they have to try that.
Yep, they say there's no atheists in the foxhole, right? So, I drew you to myself from the ends of the earth and called you from its farthest corner. Now, this is kind of strange because why is he saying this? How many times did God bring the children of Israel out of stuff? Right? So let's take a think for a second. Right? We're probably not going to get them all, but I want to get a few of them so you have an understanding of how many times God actually brought his chosen people out. So who was the first one he brought out? We already mentioned his name. Abram. Right? Then, you're going too fast. All right? Out of Abram's family, who did he bring out? Lot. But his wife had a choice and she made the wrong one. Right? So then we go a little bit further, and then where do we see the next time God brings people out? Out from Laban's. All right? Well, actually, he had destroyed Abimelech and brought him out. All right? And then let's jump to another big one. He brought all of the family of Abraham out of where? He brought his family out of Israel, brought them to Egypt for a reason, right? To protect them, to supply them, to grow them, because the world was going to have a what? Famine. So he took them out of their home in order to protect them. And then when it was time, he brought them out of the land of Goshen and brought them out of Egypt into the land. He brought David out of the pasture with the sheep and into the palace. Triumphed over this one, over that one, all these things, and God has brought them out. And he's saying that when they go into this captivity with Babylon, what is he going to do? He said, I am going to be bringing you back out. Because he said they'd only be in Babylon for how long? 70 years. Right? And how did he know that? Man, he must be smart. All right? Now, God said that he would bring his people back. What is the most recent bringing the people back? The formation of Israel, right? As a country. Now, yeah, it's been almost 70 years, right? Now, are there still people of Israel dispersed among the nations? And there's still probably going to be a bringing back out, right? What is the word they use? It's aliyah, right? Where the Jewish people of the world begin to return to Israel. All right. Has that started? Yep. All right. Am I?
Every 70 years, sometimes there was 7 years too with Israel. But now it's been like 27 years that they became back a nation.
Yeah, it's been 70 years since they've basically been a nation. So you see, God's always bringing his people out. He called them out from the furthest corner. He says, you are my servant. I have chosen you. I have not rejected you. What is he addressing right here? He's not the one rejecting anybody, right? So we always have this tendency is, why, God, did you do this to me? Right? Why did you leave me out here? Why did you abandon me? I can't tell you how many times as a pastor, and I'm sure any of you have counseled anybody for any length of time, you're going to hear that a lot. Because people think that God left them somewhere. God never left them at all. They just chose not to obey the Lord.
You know something, why don't they blame the devil? You know, what makes me sick about blaming God? Not to blame the devil, why do they blame God?
Because they believe a lie.
Yeah, that's it.
I mean, it's just that simple. They believe a lie. So here's what God is saying. Look, I didn't leave you, so I want you to think correctly. I want you to repent from your foolish thoughts, and I'm going to cause you to think correctly. So here's the first thing you have to think. Do not yield to fear, for I'm always near. Why can we not fear? Because God is always. I don't fear because he is. That kind of rhymes, right? So you might want to remember it. Never turn your gaze from me, for I am your faithful God. That didn't quite rhyme, but what is he trying to tell us? Okay, when you take your eyes off of him, what happens to you? You sink, right, Peter? When your eyes aren't fixed on Jesus, you sink. But when your eyes are fixed on him, you can walk on that troubled water, right? I will infuse you with my strength and help you in every situation. I will hold you firmly with my victorious right hand. Now, I really want to take a few seconds on this because I believe that the life we're living right now in this time period, they misunderstand how God does things. Because they have this concept that if I believe in God, he's going to do everything for me. right? This right here tells you how God is. I will infuse you with my strength. Think about those big heroes of the Bible. Moses, Gideon, David, all these guys, right? Samuel. God didn't do it for them. He did it with them, through them. Right? And some of them were, Moses was really reluctant to go do what he was supposed to. Gideon was like, okay, God, I'm going to test you this way, I'm going to test you that way, and then I'm going to test you this way and that way and that way again. Right? Because they are having a struggle understanding that God could work through them. Modern church, no different. We struggle with the idea that God can work through us. God is not going to do it in spite of us. He's going to do it with us. And I know we've quoted this a dozen times over. God does nothing on the earth unless he first tells who? His friends, the prophets. Why? Because what does a prophet do? He declares it, right? He partners with God the same way an idol maker partners with a demon. Did you realize that? That we partner with God in the same way that people partner with witchcraft. Why is it that people find it so much easier to partner with witchcraft than they do partner with the Spirit of God? It comes more natural because all witchcraft is designed to do is to please who? You, not God. Hence the big problem. We are always looking for ways to please ourselves and not be submitted to the lordship of Jesus Christ. I will hold you firmly with my victorious right hand. Now, I got to thinking about that, and I thought, that sounds kind of strange. Because I got the picture of God holding this big, massive sword, right? And the problem is we think we're standing behind God. And God's up there in front, whacking down all of our enemies, right? Tearing up the stuff. Oh, go get him, God. Go get him. Go get him, God. Go get him. And as I was pondering and thinking on this, it says, I will hold you in my victorious right hand. It dawned on me, yeah, how can he hold a sword and me at the same time? Because we are the sword. Right? So when you stop being the sword in his victorious right hand, it doesn't weaken his right hand. It just means that you're in the sheath and you ain't getting nothing done. Right? So the minute we reserve ourselves thinking, oh, we got to let God do this, we got to let God do this. Now, I'm not saying doing it your own strength because that's not what he just said. He says, I will be your strength. I will infuse you with everything I am. I will help you in every situation, but you got to be the sword in my hand. You got to trust that no matter which way I swing this thing, it's going to work for you. All who rage against you will be ashamed and disgraced. All who contend with you will perish and disappear. You will look for your enemies in vain. Those who war against you will vanish without a trace. You see, when Israel took over the land, they didn't stay on one side of the river until Jesus was done cleaning up the mess. What did they have to do? They had to go and participate. They had to march around Jericho. They actually had to wage war. They actually had to kill people. Now, I'm not telling you to run out and kill people. I'm telling you that right now. That is on tape. Everybody heard it. All right? That's not what I'm saying. I'm saying we don't fight against flesh and blood. We fight against principalities and powers. So we are to address principalities and powers in our life in such a way as they will be ashamed and disgraced. They will perish and disappear. They will be of no more consequence. You will drive them from your land. Yes, sir. Yeah.
This is basically saying, prophesying about Jesus casting out the legion of demons out of that man.
Yes.
Because
Yeah.
they threw themselves in front of him, say, why have you come to torment us? Why have you come now, you most high Son of God? Please let us get into those pigs. Go ahead. And then, phew.
Yep, right over the cliff they went. That's exactly right. That is exactly right. So God restates it. I grip your right hand and won't let you go. See? He's saying you are what I'm going to use to defeat the enemy. You. It's you are the one that's going to defeat the enemy. Right? I whisper to you, don't be afraid. I'm here to help you. I'm not here to do everything for you. I'm here to do things with you. I'm not sending you off on your own. I'm actually going with you. You're going in the power of my might. I go with you. Do not be afraid. I am here to help you. Jacob, although you feel like a grub worm, have no fear. You know, we often get hung up on what we see and what we feel. And the sad thing is, 9 times out of 10, what we see and what we feel is not the truth. So we react to what we see and what we feel. So that means we're reacting to something that is not the truth, and therefore we then end up in a mess. Then we cry out to God, oh, help me, I'm in a mess. And we can't get out of the mess until we do what? Think differently, right? We've got to understand who he is. And he goes, have no fear, O men of Israel, I am here. That sounds like something Superman would say, right? Right? I am your kinsman redeemer, the Holy One of Israel. Kinsman redeemer. Who's he talking about? What story is he talking about? The Ruth Boaz story, right? So all these people in Israel, would they know the story? Yes, they would. Was Ruth a Jewish person? No, she was a pagan. Woo, look, he brought another pagan out, right? Just like he brought all of us pagans out, right? That's what Gentiles are, by the way, pagans. So, I am your kinsman redeemer. I will bring you out, pay your dues, and redeem you, restore you, put you back where you belong. I am the Holy One of Israel. Now, go back to your identity. We just went back to his identity and how it reacts to you. Now he's going to go back and say, I am making you a new creation. I am making you into a powerful threshing instrument with teeth, new and sharp. You will reduce hills to chaff and crush mountains into dust. Now, you know, it says if we say to this mountain, be thee removed into the sea, we all start praying towards a mountain, see which one we want California to fall into. Sorry about that. All right. Mountains and hills here refer to what? Places, powers, cities, and nations. Right? Because remember, the islands of the sea, the lands of the sea, the many nations. All right? He's saying little nations, hills. Big nations, powerful nations, mountains. He's using illustrative words so that they understand the immensity of God. And who's going to reduce them to chaff and crush them? You are. So, you know, our house verse is Isaiah 61, right? But you know in Isaiah, in like 3 or 4 different places, it says, we are the restorers, repairers of the breach. We're the rebuilders of the cities. It doesn't say he is. It says we are. It doesn't say God is. It says We are. Even in the New Testament, when he goes and tells them to preach the kingdom of God is coming, right? Just wait for it. Wait for it. Just sit there and wait for it. Get your golden ticket here, sit there on a bench over there, the train will be to get you soon. That's not the gospel, is it? But that's what's getting preached in pulpits all across America. Get your golden ticket, wait for the glory train to come and get you. Right? We are the ones that's supposed to be rebuilding what was devastated, what was ruined. It is your responsibility to do that. Because it was your responsibility from the day Adam was created. Right? He was supposed to subdue the earth, bring a garden-like atmosphere, kingdom. He was supposed to bring the kingdom here. Jesus was our forerunner, our elder brother, our example of what it looks like to bring the kingdom. We're supposed to follow suit. We're not supposed to wait for him to come back to start work. Right? We're supposed to go do what he's called us to do now. Verse 16 says, you will winnow them, and a stormy wind will blow them away. Then you will spin and dance with rejoicing in Yahweh, boasting with admiration in the Holy One of Israel. We will celebrate in exuberance, singing, dancing, feasting, and we shall glory in who? The Holy One of Israel. The issue is a lot of times when we start getting stuff done, what goes to our head? Pride. And what does our head then do? Swells up, right? And every time our head begins to swell, what is coming soon thereafter? We get the, right? We get top heavy. We end up face planting. Because everything that we can do, we have to do it how? I can do all things through Christ who strengthens me. Isn't that funny? Because that sounds sure a whole lot like what Isaiah said, isn't it? We have to understand that everything that we do in his strength, for him, by him, through him. And he does it through us. It's a partnership, right? So then, verse 17 and 19, God is letting us know his heart right here. I, Yahweh, will respond to the cry of the poor and needy. When they are thirsty and their tongues are parched with thirst, when they seek a drink of water, but there is none, I, the God of Israel, will not abandon them. Now, one of the things that we have to remember that we have a tendency to forget, because in our modern day and age, water is an easy to get commodity. Right? Now, in this kind of weather out here, it's not as quite as easy as we would like it to be, but it's still, in America, you can't really go very far without being able to get a drink of water. You know, when we go to Africa, there's places, and probably even in some of the more desert nations, where people have to walk a long distance to get water to drink. And that water you wouldn't drink. Matter of fact, some of the water that they drink, I don't know if a dog would drink. Right? But it's the only water they have. And the Bible is very clear that water is a sign of blessing. Rain is a sign of blessing. So when there was no rain, when Elijah shut up the clouds, it was because of the sins of the people, right? And it didn't rain again until he said it was going to rain. So he shut the rain off, created a famine and a drought, and he's the one who brought the rain back. So when we look at this, that God says, I will not let them that are truly thirsty, who are seeking a drink of water but can't find them, I will not abandon them, but I will open up refreshing streams on the barren hills and springing fountains in the valley. I will make the desert a pleasant pool and a dry land springs of water. I will plant in the treeless desert cedars and acacia, myrtle and olive trees. I will set in the wilderness evergreens together with many elm and cypress. Everyone will see and know that I, Yahweh, with my mighty hands have done this. they will consider and comprehend that the Holy One of Israel has created it. I want to just take a few minutes because you've probably already forgotten what the conversation is. Who's he conversing with? The nations of the world. What was the conversation about? Let's discuss who's the biggest boy on the block. Right? And the conversation is, even all the dry, desolate, arid places that have nothing but wasteland in them, I can turn them into gardens. Lush, lavish, overflow with abundant resources. Because I am the Creator. I am not created. Every idol that those people made, who created it? They did. God is making an emphatic emphasis here. I am the beginning. I am the Creator. Everything here I have done. So verse 21 says, Yahweh says, present your case. Let's hear your arguments. Says the King of Jacob's tribes, come, you idols, let's hear your prophecy for the future. Tell us about your former prophecies so we can test them to see if they were fulfilled, or decree some future event for us. Prophesy what the future holds to prove to us that you are gods. Do something, anything, frighten us, put us in awe. But you are nothing at all. Now, who's he talking about? Has not this already played out somewhere in the Bible? That would have been Elijah, right? Elijah says, okay, you got your God, I got my God. You got your bull, I got my bull. You got your rocks, I got my rocks. You got your wood, I got my wood. And heck, I'll even drown all my wood in water. And then you go first. I'll let you go first. You can wake your God up, see what he's got going on. And after the course of the day, they're yelling, screaming, praying, cutting themselves, dancing. They're exhausted. They're doing all kind of stuff. And Elijah's over there sipping an iced tea going, hey, maybe he's on vacation. Maybe he just doesn't hear you right now. And it actually says maybe he's on the toilet. I mean, who says stuff like that besides me, right? I must be related to Elijah, right? I mean, he makes all kind of fun to them. So they've been hours and hours. They've cut themselves. They're bleeding. They're exhausted. They've done everything they know to do, and they're all sitting down panting like dogs. And after he has his assistants pour water all over the offering, the wood, the altar, and it even fills up a trough around the altar, he prays this magnificent prayer. If you be God, bring fire. Poof, end of story. Right? He's recalling the story for their remembrance. And he's making fun, just like Elijah made fun of them